Now, moms, I am so excited to share my interview with Leila Miller, the author of Raising Chaste Catholic Men, Practical Advice Mom to Mom. This interview is especially for boy moms, but I am personally a girl mom and still received so much wisdom, so don't turn this off if you don't have boys. You will still get some great insights from Leila for your daughters. Now, since this conversation is about chastity, there will be some topics or words dropped that you might not want little ears to hear, so this is your chance right now to pause this, send kids out of the room, plug your earbuds in, do whatever you need to do because you do not want to miss listening to this interview with Leila Miller. She has special advice for moms of little boys, think 5 and under. She also offers her family's insights on how they navigate pop culture, and she also shares a few things she may have done differently if she could go back to the beginning of her parenting journey. You are going to want to learn from her super practical advice. She even has step-by-step ways to have conversations when your kids get exposed to something in the younger years and you want to explain to them how your family views this issue. She does a great job, and I do not want you to miss this 45-minute interview, so make sure you are subscribed. And if you can't even wait for that, you can go to holyheroesfund.com, and I will link Leila Miller's book, Raising Chaste Catholic Men, Practical Advice Mom to Mom. You are going to want to listen to this interview, and then I think all of you are going to want to read her book. Alrighty, we are thrilled to have Leila Miller, author of Raising Chaste Catholic Men, on the podcast today. And Leila, I really wanted to talk to you today because I think there are so many moms who would benefit from your wisdom. So why did you write this book, Raising Chaste Catholic Men?
So it's a great question because I did not really have any intention in writing a book, but I had a blog that was popular for many years called Little Catholic Bubble. And I did a lot of just basic catechesis and had young moms who were very interested in the articles that I wrote and the blog posts. And after a while, after, obviously you become friends with some of the people who are, on your blog or listening to you. And I was an older mom with some grown-up kids and some still coming up, but these were a lot of new moms. And they started to ask me privately, can you help us learn how to raise good men? Basically, we are so scared. The culture is really awful. The pornography, everything. We're scared for our boys. Can you help just give us some tips, what you've learned because you've raised a few good men. And I started thinking when enough people started asking me, I was like, well, okay, maybe I do have something to say. And then because I'm just a writer by nature, I said, well, okay, I'm just going to write it for these folks. And I actually first self-published this short, easy to read, really simple book. And then, of course, Holy Heroes was so wonderful and picked up the book, and then we did like a second edition that included more things that were happening in the culture and such. So it's really just a sweet little book that's mostly just a conversation between myself and a young mom who theoretically could be sitting in my kitchen. Just we're talking about just different issues and how to raise boys.
Yeah, and I think the subtitle really speaks to that. Practical advice, mom to mom. One thing I did want to ask you about when I was looking through it just to prepare, you have a chapter called The Two Big Accusations, and you say these are the two charges that are thrown against the church so often that we must teach our children how to respond to them. And the first one is the church is obsessed with sex, and the second one is the church is imposing its views. And I think that is, really good insight. Those are the two things everyone wants to talk about. So for those two accusations, how do you suggest, preparing your kids to face those? Or maybe even it's your kid saying that to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes it's just a matter of bringing it to their consciousness because it's actually really obvious once you state the obvious. So we're kind of bombarded with this propaganda that the church, is the one that's obsessed with sex and always talking about it. And first of all, there's an irony there because, of course, if anybody's been in the church for the last 50 years, you know that you almost never hear about the sexual issues from the pulpit. You almost never get the teaching directly from your parish or where you're going to go to Mass every week. You're not hearing any of it about the sexual sins or how to avoid them or any of that. So there's kind of an irony there. If anything, we've backed off talking about sins like that, which tend to be now, they are the predominant sins in the culture. So that brings us to the fact that, well, yeah, what is the sin of the day? What are the sins du jour, so to speak? And they are the sexual sins, but it's the culture who's obsessed with sexuality and sex and deviancy and disordered sexuality and moral sexuality and just on and on and on. So we see that even in now preschool shows. We see this kind of gender ideology and homosexual acceptance of that as normal and ordered. We see that everywhere. So it's kind of ironic when the church, who has done nothing other than just say what she has said for 2,000 years, and which the culture used to go along with, that now the accusation comes, well, it's the church who's obsessed. It's like, no, the church is just kind of saying what she's always said. And in fact, she's kind of saying it quietly, to be really honest. But all you have to do, and all your children need to do, especially your preteens and your teens, but even now, unfortunately, younger ones, is look around. Just look at their peers. Look at what's happening in the schools. Look at what's happening in the libraries. Look what's happening on the TV shows and the movies. It is the culture constantly obsessed. Oh, and social media, gosh, don't even get me started. They are the ones obsessed with sex. And the church is simply responding, as she always has, by teaching the truth. So that doesn't hold water once you look at it. And an honest, reasonable mind will see that as soon as that's brought to their attention.
I know something that a lot of moms with little kids talk about a lot is just how stressful and honestly how scary it can sometimes seem to raise kids in today's culture. And I sometimes like to say that in, air quotes, because I think there's always been a lot of stress with raising kids. I don't think this is necessarily unique to our time. But you actually have a chapter in this book called Fear Has a Place. So what do you say to moms who come to you who are anxious and you're actually saying, yes, I think there is a place for maybe some concern in parenting today?
Well, the one thing I want to say is that I'm always trying to give parents back their confidence. Like, really, we are equipped to give instruction and to be the authority for our children. It's a God-given authority. It's something that's backed up by His grace, so we don't have to worry about it. We need to be more confident. When I speak of fear having a place, I meant specifically that to teach boys that there are consequences to behavior around sexuality that is disordered, so that we don't need to just pretend like, well, maybe we just won't discuss consequences. We won't discuss the fact that not only are there consequences temporally, like if you misuse sex, you will encounter very bad things. There will be very bad things that come. And if you misuse sex, also there are spiritual implications, which is you could, in these sins, if you're committing them willfully, you're committing mortal sins, you could risk your eternal soul. And hell is real. So that's what I mean by fear, is that some people say, well, you should never scare your children. And it's like, well, we do tell our little kids not to touch hot stoves. Why? We tell them the consequence, because you're going to burn your hands. Don't run into the street. You're going to get hit by a car. You could die. So we need to be able to say these things, not like all the time where we're just pounding them, and not in a fear-based way. But we do need to say, hey, look, you may think it's no big deal if you stumble upon pornography on the internet, but guess what? You could become addicted, just like a drug, just like if you took pills, fentanyl or whatever, you could become addicted instantly and it could destroy you. In the same way, you need to think of porn that way, because you need to know the danger. So things like that. Or you could get a girl pregnant. You could tell to a teenager who's, thinking of, maybe who knows what he's thinking of with his girlfriend. And that girl, you could say, that girl could end up aborting your child. Now, if your children are pro-life boys, that's going to horrify them. They will have to live with that for the rest of their lives, and they'll have no say in it. So things like that. I mean, don't say it all at once, and you don't bombard them with it, but you make them understand, you bring it to their consciousness that bad things absolutely do happen with the misuse of human sexuality, and that is the type of fear that is okay to give them. It's like a warning. It's like a consequence, which we have a responsibility to say, rather than just to kind of gloss it over and say, oh, it's never any big deal. If you do it, it's, just go to confession maybe. Or no, you also have to paint the picture of what could happen in their life and other lives if they go ahead with it. So that type of thing is kind of informed consent, but it is a kind of a fear that we do need to be okay with.
Yeah, and in an earlier chapter, you had said your 2 rules
for what you need to know for your son's early years about raising chaste Catholic men is to, one, respect the latency period, and two, don't freak out about stuff.
Yes.
So that's
right.
Honestly, most of the audience is probably saying, okay, I've got really, really little boys. You are a mom who has written this book, and you have boys who are now older. I know you've launched a bunch of them out into adulthood now. So these two rules, can you just elaborate them, and anything else you have to say for moms of like little boys, think maybe like 5, 6, 7, that's still kind of little to me.
It is, and I know it's getting harder and harder in this culture to keep them kind of sheltered from what the culture is trying to tell them because, of course, like we've talked about, even Blue's Clues and some of these other shows are bringing in LGBTQ themes, which the Catholic Church says should not even be introduced to children before adolescence. So we have a real problem. We must, protect that latency period. The latency period is something also, I think JP2 called it the years of innocence. And those are the years before adolescence. So kids should be kids. They shouldn't be learning anything explicit about sexuality. Everything is indirect. There's a wonderful document called The Truth and Meaning of Human Sexuality that was written in 1995 by the Pontifical Council for the Family. Look it up online, print it out, read it. And it's how to deal with these issues within the family indirectly when they're small. And nothing explicit needs to be said. Unless something comes up, directly in their face, and then you have to handle things very, very delicately and ask questions to make sure that, you're not going farther than the kid has learned. But basically, it is your job to shelter the kids until they're old enough to kind of handle things. So you teach them indirectly by hopefully a good marriage or having them see a man and a woman married and in love. They learn that babies come from mom and dad loving each other just in the family situation. They don't need anything explicit. And then when or if something comes to you that seems shocking that they say or that they hear, I always say, do not freak out. Do not freak out, because the first time you freak out when you hear something from your child, they will know that they can't come to you again. They won't want that reaction. So you have to put on your best actress, face and just say, oh, okay, well, where did you hear that? Okay, well, who said that? What do you mean by that? And just be completely unaffected by it, because you want them to come back to you. And they will. They will trust you if you give them not only a non-judgmental kind of reaction, but also if you tell them the truth to the best of their age ability. So I don't know if you want an example of that type of thing. I can tell you something that happened with my youngest boy, who was 5 years old at the time. He came home from school, and I was cooking some soup and ladling out this soup for him, and all of a sudden he says, Mom, girls can marry girls. And I said, and this is right around the time of the whole gay marriage thing that had gone on, in the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And I very calmly, I didn't respond with any, freak out. I just said, well, where did you hear that, honey? And he said, well, Katie told me. And I said, well, gosh, Katie's a really sweet little girl, but she's wrong. And isn't it sad? And then without going into details, again, you don't have to go into details of homosexuality. You say, gosh, she's mistaken, and it's sad because even adults are mistaken. But, think about that God wouldn't really want that, because what does God want? Well, he wants each child to have a mommy and a daddy. And wouldn't it be sad? And isn't it sad when a child doesn't have a mommy or a daddy, or, only has a mommy but is missing a daddy or something? You could say it however it needs to be said in that particular situation. But he understood that completely. He's like, oh, yeah, that would be sad. And he knew that was like a good answer. And so I said, sometimes the law says things that aren't right. Like there used to be slavery, and the law said that was okay. And if your child's old enough, you can mention, there used to be there is abortion, and that's not okay. So you can tailor that to the child, and your child better than anyone else. But it's those kinds of things. I can tell you, he was 5 when that happened. He was in kindergarten, and he's 14 now. It has never been an issue. He completely gets it. He never even asked about it again, except that, we talk about things really openly. But it wasn't like he fought me on it, because of course it's sad if a child doesn't have a mom or dad. And of course God wants you to have both. So again, you're teaching your kids, hopefully, ladies out there, what the natural order is, what God's created order is, and all that should make perfect sense to them. And then when something that deviates from that comes into their sphere, you can quickly explain why that wouldn't be the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've touched on something that I know most adults talk about, which is this concept of natural law. And that seems really difficult sometimes when you get in the weeds of it to explain to kids. And I know you've done a lot of work around, breaking down natural law in a way that it is, understandable for kids. Do you just have anything to kind of share? I know that's a huge question to ask, like, how do you talk about natural law with kids? But do you have any tips for someone who says, I know all these things, it's not just revealed by the Catholic Church, but a lot of these moral issues are things that we can understand through simply natural law.
Absolutely.
How are we doing this with our kids?
Yes, and sadly, it's how we used to always teach our kids. This is it's new where we've started teaching them through like experiential and subjective and emotional ways. What we need to teach them to begin with is just like you teach ABCs. You need to teach reason, how to think, and you think by looking at how things are made. What's the design of something? So we would say, what is the purpose? What is this thing and what is it for? And so just as human beings make things like chairs and cars and brushes and, lamps, and they're made with a purpose. They have a purpose. And if you use something against its purpose or against the way it's designed, things aren't going to go very well. But if you use it according to its design, things are going to go really well and things will flourish. So, for example, you can easily tell a child, this is actually really simple for them, make it a fun game. Hey, what would happen if mommy brushed her hair with this electric mixer? And, small child would just laugh and they'd know that's silly. Oh, that's so silly. You mess up your hair and it wouldn't work. Yep, exactly. And then you could say it again with, what if daddy put molasses in the gas tank, in the car's gas tank? What? That wouldn't work. You need to use gasoline. Oh, that's right. So everything has an order. And then, of course, you teach them, well, God is the same way. When God created us and our bodies and our, the world around us, everything has a purpose or a nature. It has a meaning. And then it's easy, as you go along to say that, God's purpose was for each baby to have a mommy and a daddy, or, as they get older, sexuality is self-giving. Like, if you look at a male, these are older kids, obviously, but if you look at a male body and then a female body, you could see that they go together, and they go together because God designed it that way. And that's how life comes, things like that. So they will see that design of something, the nature of something makes sense. So all of this kind of makes sense to humans. And that's why we talk about natural law being, which, by the way, the definition really is, what natural law is, it's the universal moral law of God, which is ascertainable by anyone, whether atheist, Buddhist, Christian, through reason, through the light of human reason alone. So no divine revelation is needed to know, for example, that murder is wrong or theft is wrong, and, helping your neighbor who is starving, is right. You don't need divine revelation to know this. We all know this because God made us to know this. Divine revelation comes in with things like the nature of the Trinity, or, things like that. That's a whole other thing. That's like points of the creed. But as far as the Ten Commandments and the divine law, everybody knows it on some level in their heart. So our kids are equipped already to understand it if it's brought to them, and if they think about it with reason. So that's how we teach them, and then we teach them what their bodies are for, and little kids, they'll know that we don't. You can easily say, we don't play with our private parts because they're private and they're very special, and they're meant for something other than you just playing with them. And so later on you can explain why. But I mean, there are ways to talk about this with kids, and I've put a lot of that in the book. So natural law actually is a very easy way to do it. It's the way we always used to do it. We just have to learn about it ourselves because adults unfortunately haven't been taught. I never knew about it, even though I always used this method of teaching. I didn't even know it had a name. So it's been incredible. And once things make sense to children, they will accept it. They may deviate from it because sin and free will and temptation, but they will accept it within their reason, within their mind, and eventually they will come back to it.
I feel like this is a hard shift from natural law, but you have a chapter where you specifically talk about pop culture with kids, and particularly about boys, because, well, I think a lot of what you said can be applied to boys and girls. This book is specifically talking to boy moms. And I know you go into a lot of different facets of pop culture, because this is a huge question. But just off the top of your head, what are a few rules around pop culture that have worked for your family and that you would recommend kind of starting now when you do have little kids, so that they're just part of your family culture as your kids and your boys grow up?
Right. So, and believe me, as even since the time I wrote this book, pop culture has changed. I mean, social media has sort of waylaid everybody. So,
Yeah.
the first thing I would say is, you are responsible for what your kids take in their brains and in their minds and in their souls. I believe, we're supposed to be in the world, but not of it. Part of being in the world for us, and again, I always say this is what the Millers have done. Obviously, other families can discern differently, so long as we're not in sin. We have had an approach where we did, allow video games. I kind of wish we hadn't allowed as many. So if you have a chance not to, that's great. But like phones, we don't let our kids have smartphones until they're well established in their character and they're well established in their faith, and they might be, in high school before that even happens. I had one child who didn't get a phone until he was a senior, I think. And, that's just how it goes. We just want to keep them shielded a little bit from kind of always being on that and then all the dangers there. The computer always was in the main room, so everybody kind of had to use it around other people. We didn't really restrict their music. I didn't go very on them as far as like, okay, what's every song you're listening to? I do agree that there are songs that should never enter their brains, but I'm not over them all the time with that, because I know that they have been instructed and formed enough to discern pretty well what they shouldn't be listening to, and if so, then they need to get to confession. And so, again, that's going to be different for every family. We didn't have a big problem with dating because the kids knew from early on that dating is for marriage, and so they have been pretty good about just friendships until it's time to discern marriage. And, half of our kids are married now, so that's nice. And the others who are adults are still in school, and they're not quite ready to start any serious dating. So I don't know, just if you get that in their heads and you explain what sex is for and what marriage is for, it does tend to resonate with them. It might not always, but again, that's where you have to be very discerning, and you have to have your husband, hopefully, if he's involved, in the family. Hopefully, I have a whole chapter on what if you don't have a husband, or what if you don't have that, and what if things go wrong. That's the last chapter in the book. But generally speaking, you're going to have to discern with each child. Also, I think I put that in there, where each child had to learn things at different ages and different times, depending on what their personalities or their situation was. So I gave our little Miller overview of what we do with pop culture, with the caveat that everybody's going to have to do it according to how their family needs it. And really out there today, it's crazy. And I don't even know, starting off again today, I might just throw the whole TV out. I mean, I didn't, that would have been an easy chapter. Just say no television, no phones, but everyone's, got to discern for themselves how their kids are reacting. My rule of thumb is, if the child's character changes, then we make changes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is an ironclad. Yeah, that's ironclad.
Yeah, you're talking to someone, we don't have internet in our house.
Wonderful.
And we don't have any screens. I mean, she's not even 3 yet, but it was just, something we decided to do, and I can't really see us changing it in the future. We'll see. Never say never. At this point, I feel like now our pride is on the line, because we've done this now for 6 years, even before we had our daughter. So now we're like, oh, yes. Gosh, everyone knows that we don't have internet in our house. So if we ever change it, everyone will be like, oh, why did you sell out? What happened?
Yes, exactly. The peer pressure kind of coming the other way. Yeah.
Yeah, and but it is, I think, I also have people who will say, like, just make comments about it and say, like, oh, well, do you think we should do that? And I always just say, like, I don't know. what does your family need? And I think that is so true. Like, it really just comes down to a family by family. We have friends who have also kind of ditched the internet. We have friends who have the internet but don't have screens. We have friends who just monitor. So I think it really just comes down to, like you said, we can all give advice, but it is a family by family and child by child. It's funny that I was talking to you today about this because last night we had dinner at some friend's house, and they have 6 boys. I think the oldest is 10. And it was just funny going over, and I actually made the comment to Kelly, and I said, this is so funny to watch you with these, like, 6 boys, and I'm here with, like, my 3-year-old daughter in a princess dress that I had told her to wear because I said, we're going over to their house, and if you want to play dress up, they will not have dress up for you. So you need to come in your outfit that you want to wear for dress up. So it is just, there are, it's just very different for families, and boys and girls are different. And I see that very strongly when my 3-year-old is around 6 boys, and it's so fun, but it is just a totally different parenting experience.
They're very different, and I will add to that too. What I said earlier was let your kids know there is no privacy. Whatever device you do end up giving them, whenever that happens, whether it's the TV or the computer or the phone, you have access to everything, and you can spot check at any time. As long as they know that, like you're responsible for their safety, and they need to know that. So that actually helps keep them accountable. And so that's a non-negotiable. And as far as, yes, men and women, I have a chapter, I think it's a favorite chapter I have in the book, Raising Chaste Catholic Men, which, by the way, can help with girls, too. And I've had a lot of dads who really like the book, too. So it's funny that it kind of covers a lot. But there's a chapter called Training Men Out of Manhood. And one of the quotes in there is Tony Esolen, who's a great Catholic writer. He says something about, you can't teach your boys to be good men, protectors and providers, when you treat them no differently from their sisters. So there is a difference between men and women. I love that you said that. There's a difference between boys and girls. We try to pretend there's no difference. It's like, what? I mean, we're going back to the garden. We're going back to creation. And God created them, male and female, on purpose. And it means they're not the same. Certainly they're equal in dignity, but they are not the same. And we have to stop pretending that they are, because that's what's messing us up in this society so much. And, thank goodness. I love being a woman. I don't want to there's a difference between men and men. We need to respect what men have in their gifts, and we respect what women have in their gifts. It's totally beautiful. But that chapter I think is important because we have started just emasculating our boys and wanting them to be just like mom or just like the sisters, and just like, want our husbands to be just like our girlfriends. Like, they're not meant to be that. They're built different, so so that's a whole thing too, which is really, really fascinating when you start diving into that.
Yeah, I was talking to another friend. Somehow all of my friends have boys. And usually not just one boy. I feel like they have many boys. And my daughter is starting at the Catholic school next year in the preschool, and I was asking my friend who has a son the same age as my daughter, and I said, is Lou going to be in her class? And she said, I think he will soon, maybe in kindergarten or first grade, but no, he's not going to be there this fall. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I think there's a big difference between a 3 to 4 year old girl and a 3 to 4 year old boy. The 3 to 4 year old girl is like thrilled to go to school and the artwork and everything. It's just the difference right there. And it was funny because it didn't occur to me until my friend was like looking at her 3-year-old son, like, do you think this kid is going to go to school next year? Absolutely not. Like,
right. Yeah, there is a huge difference. And anyone who's raised or seen or even like lived in the world, we know, we see it. We see the difference between boys and girls. It's very hard to deny. And so that's, I have 2 girls and 6 boys. Clearly, even in adulthood, they're different. I mean, this is not rocket science, but we want to keep pretending that everything is exactly the same. And that is what the culture is telling us. And that's why our kids are so confused. And that's why our girls don't even, culturally, they don't even like being girls. It's almost like they're ashamed of being girls. They want to be more man-like. And then you have men who are becoming very effeminate, and they want to be more girl-like because they're being slammed for their, being men. So you've got all this confusion, and then you look around, you're like, gosh, they're not doing so well. Kids aren't doing well. I mean, it's not like we have these happy, well-adjusted kids, and, we've got very broken children, broken families, of course, but broken children, and then we have confusion given to them on the ground floor since they're preschool on up, and then mixed messages, and then on top of that, they're told not to even know whether they're a man or male or female. They're supposed to decide for themselves, and, hey, how do you feel? It's like, what? And then, we wonder why we have so much anxiety, so much depression, so many people on, different drugs and therapy. Everybody's got a therapist, and they're young adults. And now the suicide rates are just going through the roof. And yet we're going to pretend like everything's just going fine. We're getting closer to what we were supposed to be in a society. No, we're getting further and further away from it. So it's really time for a gut check and come back to reality.
Yeah, I went to a big and very well-known public university for college and didn't lose my faith. Obviously, I went to Mass every single Sunday, and I've had some people ask since then. I've been out of college for 6 or 7 years now, and I have had a few parents kind of ask me, like, okay, you went to a public university and you didn't lose your faith. Why? And I just kind of look at them and say, like, it was so unattractive to me by the time I got to college what was going on. And I was just kind of looking at my friends who were telling me they were happy, and they were just so utterly depressed. And I mean, talk about, suicide rates that have just skyrocketed. And I've noticed as my siblings have all gone to college, I have several that are also in the military. So college and military life combined. And they'll say the same thing. Like, it is not hard to continue to reject just the lies of the modern world when the people telling them to you are not happy. Like, they think they are, but and I don't even know if some of them at this point think they are. I think they just think everyone is so unhappy like they are. Yes. And I just remember really having a moment, probably when I was like 19 years old, and just kind of looking around saying, like, I just don't see how anyone thinks this is going well. Like, that anyone would look around and say, like, yes, I would like to continue doing what my parents did before me, or what everyone around me and the professors are saying we should keep doing. And I distinctly remember that was kind of the moment that I realized how lucky I was to have so many siblings, because I think the loneliness epidemic is out of control. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of people I could call if something went wrong. And I'm sure, I don't know if your children have articulated that to you, but I know there's many times that I look at people and just say, I don't know how we're still falling for this no kids or one kid is the best policy, because this is too lonely to keep continuing down this road.
You are 100% correct. So I'm not from I'm from, I have one sibling. My husband has one sibling. We came to our faith, later. So we ended up starting out wanting only just one or two kids, 2 or 3 kids. And thank goodness, thank God Almighty, He changed our hearts, and we were open to children. So, we had 8 children. We have 15 grandchildren so far. And the loneliness factor will never happen for our kids. And this is not to say that, of course, there are people who are infertile and have smaller families because God simply didn't give them, children. And that's a whole other issue, which, that's a cross, and that's a way to sanctification there. But for people who purposely limit their children to a very small family, which is most of the culture. We're not even talking Catholics. We're talking my whole neighborhood. All these people. It is a very lonely existence. It is a very dark existence out there. We live in a godless country now, and I'm with you. My kids are so happy to have so many siblings because, and I've told them too, we've told them, this world is so dark and so awful nowadays, because without God, what can there be but darkness? You will always have each other. And that is so beautiful. And they do have the same situation we had. Like, at least 3 or 4 of our kids went to big public universities like you did.
Yeah.
No one lost their faith. No one lost their faith. They hate the general feeling on these campuses, so they either had really good Catholic centers, or they just made their friends based on the really wonderful Newman Center or Catholic Center on campus, or like my latest son who's 19, and he's just like, he's living at home because he says, there's no way I'm living on campus. I can't handle that culture. It's awful. It's dark. It's just full of people using people and being used, and it's just nasty. It's bad. And it's a massive university. So they know by the time they get that age, they're just like, okay, we just need to get our education, whatever, and get out. And then go on and have a family life or go to a vocation, priesthood or convent. But they know this isn't real life and it's not good. And they do see, that's what I say, I think I said in I have a book called Made This Way with Trent Horn. And we basically said that they don't need to be sold on this idea that there's a right order that's being violated. They just need to look around and look at their peers. They already know that there's something very, very wrong in the culture and that people are misusing. Most of it is the misuse of human sexuality, whether it is divorce, whether it is immodesty, whether it is premarital sex, whether it is transgenderism, whether it is pornography and masturbation and all this stuff. They already know it's a misuse of human sexuality. Something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. And they can be the light to their peers because now it's mission territory. Essentially, we live in not a Christian nation anymore. We live in a mission territory. And our kids are the ones, just like in the catacombs, are the ones who are going to be that light in the darkness for their friends and their peers around them. And that's a really good thing. It's something that they, and again, for the boys, bringing it back to the boys, they want to be heroes. The men are hardwired, boys are hardwired to be heroes. To be a hero by bringing Christ to a dark world is kind of like being that white knight, being that knight in shining armor who can bring people out of their hopelessness, their darkness, and kind of, save them, bring them to Christ. So that goes into their natural inclination, these boys. And so it's not, I haven't found that it's very difficult to explain that to boys. They get it. And it actually is quite beautiful when it plays out into their adulthood.
I mean, I could keep talking to you for a very long time, but I don't want to take up too much more of your time.
Oh.
Raising Chaste Catholic Men, I'm going to make sure it's linked. I think every mom of young boys should get it. I know we talked off air, but it is a easy read, especially if you are in the early years and you don't have a lot of time for reading. This book is definitely doable. What is kind of the closing message you would have to moms with little boys?
Right. And yes, and I want to reiterate, yes, it's a very easy read. In fact, coming on this interview, I reread it because I haven't read it in a few years. And I read it like in the course of an evening. It's meant to be conversational and easy for you. I would say the number one thing is confidence in the fact that you are the parent. You have what you need to raise a child well. It isn't complicated. It isn't scary in the sense that, oh no, every force is against me. Nope. If Christ is with you, if the truth is with you, if just the natural design of God and his creation is with you, you can do this because your child, especially a small child, is hardwired to trust and believe you. If you make sure that these younger years, you're not intimidated, like, oh no, my child won't believe me if I say this or that. No, your young child will believe you. Your young child looks to you as an authority based on how God created things. And then because you've built that trust in telling them the truth and making sure that they see things as they are, that's reality. By the time they get into the preteen years and the teen years, they already trust you. They already know that you've told them the truth, that everything makes sense. And that, you will not, be shocked or react badly to their questions. And they will always see you as trustworthy, as someone who they can come to and believe. And again, we want to make it sound very complicated, but it really isn't. And yes, they could have some rocky years and some rebellion. And that's when you pull back. You make sure that you pull them back from whatever is troubling them at that point. But in their young years, you build that relationship of trust, and you can be, I would say this too, it's okay, we always say, your children don't need a friend, they need a parent. I say you could be both. As long as the parenting comes first, you can also be a friend, meaning that you want to spend time together, you like each other. But be a parent first and make sure that if things, you're the authority there, but that it's just, I want to instill confidence in young mothers. Do not feel anxious about this. It is going to be fine. You just have to trust God and just do the very simplest thing to keep your kids in the very simple truth that God has created all around you. And you'll be fine. You really will.
No, that's going to be really helpful. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Clara. I really appreciate it.